All right, this is episode 2 in the brief recounting of the life of Martin Luther. Now, I told you about Martin Luther's childhood, and let me just say that it was 1505 when the lightning struck, and that's when he decided he would enter into the monastery. 10 years later, 1515, is when he was studying the book of Romans, and he realized that he needed to just trust in Jesus, that it wasn't the church, it wasn't the sacraments, it was faith in Jesus that would make him right with God. And he was so excited. He began to tell everybody about it. But about that same time, something was happening in the Catholic Church. They were trying to build a building in Rome called St. Peter's Cathedral. And in order to build this huge, massive building, they needed lots of money. So somebody came up with the idea we should sell indulgences. And now, let me explain what an indulgence is. The Roman Catholics believed that when somebody died, they didn't go to heaven or they didn't go to hell. They went to a place called purgatory. And they stayed in purgatory, which was a place of fire and punishment, and they stayed in purgatory until all their sins could be purged away. That's why it was called purgatory. And the people, of course, were terrified. By the way, nobody in that day had a Bible. Nobody could read the Bible. They had to just believe what they were told by the church officials. And so they came up with this idea that we will sell people a piece of paper, and if they will pay a certain amount of money, we'll tell them they can get their grandfather or their uncle or their friend out of purgatory for $500 or whatever the price would be. Now, of course, that was totally wrong. That was totally dishonest, but people believed it. They didn't know any other, and they didn't know the truth. And so they would go around selling these indulgences. Also, they would sell another kind of an indulgence that said if you buy this indulgence, this will guarantee that a sin that you haven't committed yet will be forgiven. Can you believe that? Well, anyway, people did believe that, and they began to buy these indulgences. And it made Martin Luther so mad. And there was a man named John Tetzel who came to town, and he was selling these indulgences. And Martin Luther and John Tetzel really had a big argument about indulgences. Well, on October the 31st, 1517, that's 501 years ago right now, Martin Luther wrote out a list of 95 things that he would like to debate about, things that he felt was wrong with the church, the Roman Catholic Church. Now, they didn't have Facebook back then, so he couldn't post it on Facebook. They didn't even have a town community bulletin board. But what people would do is they would go to the door of the church in Wittenberg and they would post things on the door. So Martin Luther took his 95, he called it the 95 Theses, 95 questions that he had, and he took a hammer and a nail and he went and he nailed those 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg. Well, the next day, people began to read those things, and they said, well, we never realized so much was wrong with the church. And it got Martin Luther in all kinds of trouble. And he got actually called to a council meeting in which he was questioned, and they told him, if you don't recant, that is, if you don't agree that you are wrong, then you will be arrested and you will be put in prison and maybe even put to death. Well, Martin Luther at this place called the Diet of Worms stood and he said, I cannot recant. He said, unless I can be convinced by Holy Scripture or by reason that I am wrong, then I cannot go against my conscience. And he said, here I stand, I can do no other. And they were going to arrest him and put him in prison, but some friends of his kidnapped him, and they took him off to a castle in Wartburg, and they hid him for over a year. And while he was there, he translated the entire New Testament into the German language so that the people in Germany could read the Bible for themselves in their own language. And that was the beginning of what's called the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation. He was protesting against the errors in the church, and he wanted the church to reform and get back to the way it was supposed to be in the Bible. And in the next episode, I'll tell you about how he found a wife.